Thank you so much. It's really great to be here back in Christchurch. It's amazing to see the developments happening downtown. So I want you all to think about the computers that you had as a child. And a few weeks ago, I was at the Computer Museum in the heart of Silicon Valley, and this was the computer. I didn't own this, but this was the state-of-the-art computer when I was a child from the 1960s. This is the IBM 1401. It takes up a whole room, as you can see. It was made up about 65% of the computers sold in those days. And if you bought one of these, well, actually you couldn't buy them, you rented them. If you rented one of these, it cost $10,000 a month, which was the price of a house to run. So that's what the state of the art was in the 60s. And of course we know computer technology has changed dramatically since that time. So here's the obligatory slide showing going from room scale to desk scale to something you put into your lap. And now we've got devices we hold in our hand as well. So what I'm going to talk about today is other trends and how that might impact us, how we engage and interact with computers in the future to come. So a couple of trends. So first of all, content capture. If you're very lucky, 150 years ago, you may have been able to have a photo taken of yourself. And in the time since that time, we've got ability to capture and share live video, and most recently 360 video, and even capture 3D spaces. So here, for example, this is the first photo we've taken, this is the first movie made, and then on the right-hand side, you can see some more modern devices that allow you to scan rooms and capture 3D content. And within the next year or two, you'll have technology like this. This is from Occipital. It's a little handheld or a little small scanner that you can put on your iPad. And then as you wave your iPad around the room, it creates a 3D model of your environment. So within a few years, I'll have some sort of handheld device I can walk into a room, push a button, and make a 3D model, and probably stream 3D as well. So we've gone from static 2D capture to really being able to capture and share experiences in terms of the content side. The second area of trending is networking. In the 80s, you were very lucky if you had a dial-up modem, and now I'm in Australia, so we have NBN, and that gives me 25 to 40 megabits per second. But I just moved to Auckland, and my building in Auckland has fibre, so I get a gigabit per second in my building in Auckland, which is very nice. And of course, that fast speeds have changed how we can communicate. So here's the old phones across the first video conferencing in the 50s and 60s, and mobile devices, and now we're all on Facebook and streaming high definition video to our friends. And so with this type of high bandwidth, especially with 5G, you can do things like this. And this is an example of mixed reality conferencing, where you can be in a real world and your friends can beam in as virtual holograms or 3D virtual augmented reality images, and they look like they're really in the real world with you. All due to, in large extent, that fast bandwidth we have. And the last trend that I'm very interested in, so you can see that means we've gone from text-based communication to very natural, rich communication where you can share gesture and gaze and so forth. And the last trend is how to interact with computers. So in the 50s, if you had a computer, or if you in the 60s, if you'd sold your house and bought that IBM 1401, you would probably have a punch card to use it. Since that time, we've gone to keyboard and mouse, and more recently to using speech and gesture and other technologies. So here's a trend line. Here's Doug Engelbart's first mouse, some work on gesture input, and now we've got companies like Emotive that will sell you inexpensive EEG systems that can measure your brain activity. And this allows you to build very intuitive user interfaces. So here's an example of a gesture interface from the company Leap Motion that makes, this is an augmented reality interface, and when you look at your real hand, you can see a virtual menu that pops out, and you can use your other hand to interact with it in a very natural way. No keyboards or punch cards or anything like that. So that's really changed how we've interacted with computers. In the 60s and 80s, it was really about us learning how to talk to the computer, command lines or punch cards or paper tape. And now we've got the computer looking at us with cameras or listening to us with microphones, or even if we've got those brain sensors on to understand how we're feeling and responding automatically to our communication. So in general, in my area anyway, there's three big trends happening. There's one trend towards very natural collaboration, facilitated by fast bandwidths. Another trend towards experience capture. So I've got devices, I can click a button and I can capture everything around me. And a third trend towards implicit understanding. So looking at what I'm doing and trying to understand from that. And in my research lab, when I've got a lab in South Australia and also in Auckland. Actually, I'm at the University of Auckland, not at the AUT, but we're across the street, so it's almost the same. So in those labs, we're researching an area which we call empathic computing. And hopefully all of you know what empathy is. The classic definition is that, with empathy, you can see with the eyes of another person, listen with the ears, and feel with the heart of another person. So with empathic computing, the idea is to try and use computing technology to make this happen. And there's kind of three aspects. So one is building systems that can understand your feelings and emotions. Secondly, building systems that help you better experience the world of somebody else. And thirdly, systems that will help you better share the experience of other people in real time. And it turns out there's a lot of research done in these first two areas and not much in the third area, and that's where my lab is working in Auckland and in Adelaide. So for the first area, to be able to understand your feelings and emotions, you need some sort of sensor technology to be able to capture what you're doing. The second area, in terms of experiencing, this is a really great opportunity to use virtual reality, where you can go into a captured simulation of somebody else's experience. And the third area of sharing the experience, that's oftentimes where augmented reality can play a big role. So I'll show you a couple of examples of those and then talk a little bit about what we're doing in our lab and how that might relate to some of what you're interested in. So first of all, understanding. So for the last 20 or 30 years, there's been this research field developed called effective computing. This is Ros Picard, who was really the founder of the field in the mid-90s. She wrote this very influential book called Effective Computing, and she talked about how you could build systems that captured users' raw input and use that to recognize emotion. So for example, capture your heart rate or your eye gaze or your breathing patterns or face expressions. And that's gone on to become a very big industry, and there's lots of examples. This is a particularly interesting one or funny one. This is from Junrei Kimoto at the University of Tokyo, and he built these appliances that make you happy. And the idea is you can combine a smile detection with smart appliances. So William James, who's a famous psychologist, said that actually we don't laugh because we're happy because we laugh. So Junrei Kimoto thought, well, if I can force people to laugh at their machines, they'll become happy. So the first thing he did is he built a smile sensor. He basically took a Sony CyberShot that already has smile detection in it and put a light sensor exactly where the icon is that lights up when you're smiling. So like a very cheap and inexpensive way to put a smile detector. And then he plugged this to different devices. So now with this you can detect when somebody's smiling or not. So you'll see in a second. So when you smile, the icon lights up and this light sensor detects that. And so now you can put this into different devices. So first of all, here's a mirror, and the woman's not smiling, so it says she smiles. Now it's smile happy. But that really doesn't force you to smile. So the next thing he did is he took it and put it into a magnetic lock on your fridge. So you have your fridge here with this magnetic lock, and the magnetic lock still lets you open the door, so you're not going to starve. You have to pull really hard on the handle to open the door. So it's a bit of work, and then you get to the fridge. But with the smile detector, you can smile at your fridge, and the lock unlocks, and you can get your food much easier. So that's a nice example of an effective interface. And of course, as a computer scientist, what we want to do is test this. So he did a user study, and you'll see that in a second. We will always want to evaluate, whether this technology actually helps people or not. So he did a study in Tokyo, and you'll see. I think it's going to show that now. So he first of all had to find a very grumpy man. So here's the grumpy man, and this is put onto the grumpy man's fridge. So you'll see. Here's the grumpy man, right, and this is the before picture, and then I think they used it for 10 days. So for 10 days he had to smile every time he wanted to open his fridge. And then on the right hand side is the after shot. So now you can see after 10 days he's showing his teeth, so that's great. So it's a technology validation. So it turns out there's many examples of effective computing interfaces, and most of them are single-user interfaces where a person sits in front of their laptop and it recognises their emotions or determines something from other technology. So this is a very good example of being able to sense emotion. The second example in terms of experiencing, it turns out virtual reality is very good for this, and Noni Di Lupina, who's a famous virtual reality journalist and artist, said that VR offers a whole different medium to tell stories that really connect people and create an empathic connection. And she's famous for building VR simulations of famous journalist events. So, for example, this is the Project Syria, and this is a simulation of what happened in the civil war in Syria. This is the Project Homeless, where she simulated the waiting in the food line in Los Angeles. So I'll show you a small clip from Project Syria. It's a bit disturbing, but you'll see what she's done is she's taken raw footage from the BBC, and it's a bomb going off in a marketplace in Syria, and then she reproduced that in VR, and then took that to Davos to show the world leaders what it's like to be in this environment. And that's the great thing about VR, is that you can have an experience that hopefully none of us will really have in the real world, but by doing that you can get a deep sense of empathy. So here's the environment here. So you'll first of all see live footage. So there's this BBC film crew that happens to be filming in a marketplace in Syria. Oh, sorry, this is the VR simulation first of all. And this is the girl singing. And then suddenly the bomb goes off and it's just mayhem. There's bodies and there's destruction and everything like that. And so she's reproduced that in VR, and you can see how the VR environment looks. This is now the actual environment, looks very similar to what it's really like. And it's very disturbing to be in that environment and have that happen to you, but it helps you understand what people in Syria at that time were experiencing almost every day. So you can see from that virtual reality is a very powerful medium to be able to share experiences. And the area that we're mainly working in, which hasn't been as well researched, is this area of sharing. Can we develop systems that allow us to share what we are seeing, hearing, and feeling with others? And you could imagine that there could be many use cases for this. So, for example, if you think of the next Olympics, maybe there's an Olympian who's a mountain biker, and they are biking down the mountainside, and maybe she's wearing some sort of capture device, like a 360 camera, as well as heart sensors and other sensors. And then sitting at home, I can have the experience of being on the bike, barreling down the mountain, and also seeing what she's seeing and feeling what she's feeling through her heart rate and other sensors as well. So even though I'm not an Olympic athlete, I might get some of the sensation of what it's like to be competing in that sport. So we developed a number of prototypes of things like that. This was one that we developed just before I left for Australia. And in this case, we took a Arduino board that can detect your heart rate and other emotional signals, and combine that with a wearable Google Glass display for real-time emotion sharing. So the basic idea was that you've got a person who's doing something, we capture a lot of raw data from their physiological signals, we recognize from that data certain key features like your heart rate, and then map that to emotion. And then of course on the other side you have to represent that emotion somehow. Do you represent emotion using colour, sound, text on a screen, or whatever. And then hopefully the person at the other end gets a better understanding of what you're feeling and doing. So this is the system we built. We just mapped 4 emotions, so happy, sad, excited, and neutral. And then we used that to measure those emotions. We measured your heart rate, your pulse oxygen level, and also the EEG and your speech, and looking at pitch as well. So a few different signals combined together. And so you can see here's a video of the system working. Basically, one person is playing a video game, and the camera view from the Google Glass can be live streamed to a remote person who's watching what they're doing, but also on their screen they can see some of their emotion cues as well. So, and this person's playing some sort of violent video game. I'm not sure what it's called, but essentially you run around and kill people, and you have different emotions from it. So here's the opening of the game. It's very neutral, and and in this case, your person's going to start killing things and wild dogs, and you see the red bar, that's the level of excitement, and we also had their heart rate showing as well. And you can turn on these graphs and show all this raw data, which was really an overload, but anyway. Here's a happy case, I guess setting your enemies on fire makes you really happy. Yep, that's great. Then apparently in this game you have a girlfriend, and near the end of the game she dies, so that makes you very sad. So there's your blue going up for sadness. So that was the first version. Then we decided that what we want to do is be able to have sharing of more real-world tasks. So we basically combined 3 technologies together. an AR glasses, and then some eye tracking. So it's not uncommon to wear glasses on your head that have a camera that can stream to a remote person so they can see what you're seeing. But the problem with that is the cameras normally have a very wide view, and so they don't actually show you exactly what you're looking at. They show you everything in your view. So we can combine with an eye tracker so now we know exactly where you're looking. And then, if I'm sitting in front of my monitor with a camera on it, I can recognize my face expression. But if I'm walking around with a display on my head, then I don't have a camera on a stick, so I can't see what my face is doing. So we developed these very special glasses called effective wear glasses that can measure your face expression by using photosensors. So this let us share the same implicit cues you have in face-to-face conversation, eye gaze and face expression. So kind of glued it all together, and then this is the person using it. The new version is a bit smaller. So he's doing a block assembly task, and he's got this remote person who's helping him and telling him what he's doing, and he's moving this green mouse around. But the most important thing is the red dot. The red dot is the eye gaze of the person wearing the device. So when the person moves the green mouse around, he can tell if the other person is paying attention or not because the red dot follows the mouse movement. So it's unlike normal video conferencing where you have to wait till the person does something to you know if they've understood you. Now I can look. And of course, people always look at things before they interact with them, so I can tell whether the person's doing something wrong before they actually do it. So we found that sharing that information increased the sense of co-presence significantly. And the last thing I want to show you, so one of the challenges with that though is that the camera only faces in one direction. So that means the remote person can only look in one direction. So the most recent version is we've taken a 360 camera and put it on somebody's head and then streamed that remote. And so the other person on the other side now wears a VR headset, and because it's a 360 camera, they can look wherever they want. And we also have this gesture controller, so they can wave their hands in front of their face. And then on this side, the person's wearing an augmented reality display, and they'll see some virtual ghost hands in front of them showing them how to do things. So this is the ghost hands here. Now the challenge, of course, is this guy over here may be looking in a completely different direction from this guy. So we have to tell them where they're both looking. So these squares here tell you where the other person is looking. So we're doing this project with a power company in South Australia. And so here's a person looking at this control system rack and trying to get some remote assistance to help fix something with the rack. So he's wearing a gear on his head, it's an AR display with a 360, and then he sees this ghost hand in front of him, and with the ghost hand you can point and you can leave annotations in the real world. And then we're taking the 360 camera view and we're streaming that to the remote person, and the remote person can put a VR headset on and they feel like they're standing inside the body of this person, because wherever they look around they see exactly what the person's seeing. So this is what the remote person's seeing, and he's got his hands in front of his face, and he's drawing, and he feels like he's drawing actually in the real world, and that red square is where the other person is. So it's a very nice remote collaboration system. It now means that the experts at the office don't need to travel out to the power substations to help fix problems. They can stay in their office and reduce their travel time to help fix those problems. So this had a number of features like being able to support view independence and natural gesture communication. And then we also did an experiment with sharing VR experiences. The idea is that if you're in VR having a really exciting time, if somebody else can be in VR, and because it's virtual reality, they can be in your virtual body, so they can be in the same place as you, but they can hear your heart rate. And it turns out if you're getting excited and your heart rate goes up, and if I can hear it, then I can start getting more excited as well. So we built 2 virtual environments, a butterfly world where it's very calming and soothing, and this zombie attack world where the zombies are coming to kill you, and so this is what happens. So here's the player in the zombie attack world, very dark environment. That's the person moving around, the viewer is sitting down. The viewer can see what the player's seeing, but they can also hear their heart rate and see it in the corner as well. And by sharing that, we were able to elevate people's level of excitement to some extent. So what I've talked about so far, and just to wrap up, is about how we can use AR and VR for this empathic computing, where VR systems are really good for sharing experiences, and the AR systems are good for live sharing where you're trying to do a real-world task. And there's a number of trends in technology. So there's technology trends to more advanced displays, to real-time space capture. So as I said, in the near future, you'll be able to walk into a space and live stream a 3D model of that space to somebody else. Very natural gesture interaction, better eye tracking, and emotion sensing. So you can buy headsets now that have the EEG inside them that can measure my brain activity. And all these technology trends really points to this idea of empathic teleexistence. So within the next 5 to 10 years, you'll really be able to feel like you're inside the body of somebody else in the real world, or sharing a virtual environment with somebody. And that really changes your experience from being an observer to being a participant in the real world with them and helping them to perform their tasks much better, and supporting moving from more explicit to implicit communication and more experiential collaboration. So that's what I want to talk about today, and that's what our lab is working on now at the University of Auckland and University of South Australia, and we're excited to be looking for collaborators. So if any of this would be helpful for you in your business, please come and talk to me, and I'm happy to take some questions now.
Nice, thank you so much, Mark.
No problem.
Alrighty, question. What is the downside of trusting AI computing to detect and predict emotion? Downside.
Well, of course, there's lots of downsides. One of them could be how much trust you put into the system. You know, what happens if somebody hacks the system and I'm feeling really great, and my computer is broadcasting out to the world that I'm being depressed and suicidal. You know, how is that going to affect the system? So that's one downside, definitely. And also another downside is there's significant privacy issues as well, where you may not want to be able to share that you're feeling depressed or that you're feeling excited at any particular points in time.
Actually, I think that answers my next question. What kind of role will copyright of audio, video, and digital privacy have in a future where anything could be streamed and shared? Wouldn't it hinder progress?
Well, I mean, people already stream anything on Facebook anyway, so it's amazing what people do, how much privacy people are willing to give up. But in our target situation, we're mostly targeting it for professional activities, like the power company, for example, and we always include a privacy switch. So, if I'm wearing the system, I'm about to go to the bathroom, then of course I turn everything off before I do my business, and then I go back and turn it back on again afterwards. So there's ways around that, so definitely.
Excellent.
But it is a concern, yeah, definitely.
Was there any outcome to the Project Syria, where the bomb went off, and, how did the leaders react, shall we say?
It's hard to say. I wasn't involved in that project, but certainly, and there actually is a whole sequence of projects. So there's another filmmaker who did some 360 filmmaking around refugee camps in Darfur, and there's been a whole sequence of kind of emergency or disaster VR experiences. So hopefully it's making the leaders make better decisions, but I think it's a very long period of time before we see that effect, so we'll see what happens.
It does depend on the leaders too.
It does, doesn't it? Yes.
Is there a danger that by allowing people to experience things without actually doing them, they end up doing less, with all the negative health effects of that?
Well, you already see that. I mean, how many of your kids don't play outdoors anymore because they rather sit on their iPads and play virtual BMX on their iPads rather than riding their real bike? So I think technology in general always has had effects on humanity over the last thousands of years, and it's up to us whether we make that a positive or a negative effect. So certainly I hope this wouldn't take away our ability to still enjoy full lives, but this allows us, those people who can't enjoy activities outdoors or other activities, to take, to have those experiences.
Absolutely. How can we participate in further research on this project? And I think
yeah, a couple of ways. So we just got a lot of money from the New Zealand government, so thanks to you all for being taxpayers, that's great. And because of that, we now have some scholarships, so if any of you are students or PhD students who want to come work with us, we can fund you. But part of that money has a strong entrepreneurial outcome, so we're also looking for companies that are interested in helping us test it. So as I said, we had a really good partner in Australia, or have a good partner in Australia with the power company. Just to give you a bit more explanation of that, it turns out in South Australia, if the power goes out, the power company gets a fine. So if they gave me an example about how they had a guy at a power station 45 minutes from town. He made a mistake and he sent what's called a trip signal down the line. A trip signal is a signal from a generator that's about to blow up. In this case, the generator wasn't going to blow up, but because the trip signal went down the line, they took the generator offline so it wouldn't be damaged. That lost 1,000 homes lost power, and the guy didn't know how to fix it. So he called back to the base, say, I need some help. The guy in the base drove out 45 minutes in his van, took him 5 minutes to flip the switch. It cost them $500,000 in fines. So with our technology, instead of doing the $500,000 thing, they can put the headset on, the guy can remote fix it, and the power's out for 5 minutes rather than for an hour. And I'm sure many of you own companies that have similar regulatory and experiences as well. So if any of you are needing technology that is relies on remote assistance, then I'll be happy to collaborate with you as well.
Nice. How far away are we from these technologies going mainstream, i.e. used by every day by people in their work?
Well, it depends what you mean. So already on your mobile phones, there are a number of apps you can get where you can live stream what you're doing and have a remote person provide annotation stuff. So, for example, I go shopping, I can pull up the app and show my wife a selfie of me wearing clothing, and she can tell me whether I'm looking good or not, and draw arrows and saying this makes you look fat here and so forth. So that's already available. And the great thing, I mean, most of our experiences are designed to be used with head-mounted displays. The head-mounted displays now are getting to be about $300. So the cost of barrier to entry is very low cost. So, right now 1 billion people on the earth have augmented reality technology in their pockets with their mobile phones. Within 10 years' time, there would be about 150 million or so people who have head-mount displays. So it's really just a question of time. But the great thing from our perspective is all the technology trends are working in the right direction. We've got 5G coming in the next year or two, which will means we can stream high-def video. We've got a number of companies building user-friendly headsets, and other companies building sensing technology that you can be worn all the time. So all those things converge together to make our platform possible.
Nice. When there is a participant and a viewer in VR, like your example, how does the viewer look around? Wouldn't they just only see what the participant is looking at?
We tried that, and it turns out that what you can do when you've got two people in VR is you can take the one person's who's playing the game, that's really great, take the other person and slave their view to the first person. It turns out that makes you really sick, because the person who's playing the game is moving around, having a great time, you're sitting down and your view is going like this, even if you're not moving your head. So one of the things we quickly learnt was that you could slave the position, but you have to make sure the other person can freely turn their head around, otherwise they'll get sick. So it's kind of like being a parrot on somebody's shoulder. So the person is moving around through the space, and then you can look freely around, so it's like being a kind of a parrot on their shoulder, and it works out pretty well actually.
I think your slides alluded to this, but has there been any research on the possibility of using brainwaves to detect emotions instead of physical cues?
Lots, yes, and so there's some very interesting papers on using brainwaves in shared VR experiences to help people with meditation. And as I get into a meditative state, I can share it. We are now doing a project on something called hyperscanning, and hyperscanning is where if you're in a meeting with somebody and you're talking with them and you start connecting, sometimes you get into a flow state where time seems to slow down and you really feel like you're syncing up. Well, it turns out in that state, your brainwaves actually are syncing up, and you can measure that. And but people haven't looked at how they can use this technology to help with that. So we've got a project now looking at how you can use AR technology to help people get into this hyperscan state where they can feel like they're communicating much clearer and syncing up much clearer. So definitely it's possible. I should have mentioned also, if you want, if you email me, I'll send you copies of all these slides as well, and there's other material I can send you too, so you can see, you can share it with your friends if you like.
Nice, thank you. Probably last question. How can this project help the New Zealand farming industry? Because it's New Zealand, right?
Of course. A number of ways. So just a simple example. So when I was young, we had a small lifestyle property. We had 6 ewes. We bought a ram in, and the next year we had 9 ewes because they all got pregnant. Actually, no, it was 13, sorry, a few twins. But my father really wasn't very good at helping sheep give birth. But you can imagine with something like this, if we had one of the sheep getting into difficulty, my father could use the technology while he's trying to help the ewe to remote call a vet and say, hey, what's happening here? And the vet doesn't have to drive hours to our property anymore. So that's a very trivial example, but wherever you can imagine that you need remote expertise, and you can think of many examples, forensics, healthcare, education, on the farm when you've got a piece of expensive equipment that's broken down and the sales rep's in Auckland and you're in Invercargill, then wherever you need that type of remote expertise, this technology can be used to take those remote eyes and bring them to you and help that person remote put their hands into your space like the floating hands you saw as well. Great.
Well, please show your appreciation for Mark.